In the abyss of ages, when the Emperor of mankind forged his empire from the ashes of the old night, the 14th Legion was raised. From the warlike clans of ancient Albia, from those who had fought in the twilight of the Unification Wars, came warriors whose flesh and spirit were tempered for unyielding endurance. They wore gray armor adorned with symbols of bygone victories, and fell upon the foe in the hour when day faded and shadows lengthened. For this they were named the Dusk Raiders. They were heavy infantry that knew no fatigue. Their tactics were simple and merciless: to hold the line when others withdrew, to advance when others fell, to survive where the very air carried death. Bolters thundered in their hands like sentences of doom, and their heavy boots trod upon worlds that refused to bow before the light of the Imperium. In those early days of the Great Crusade, the 14th Legion did not yet bear the name that would one day make the galaxy tremble. They were simply the Unbreakable. But fate, as ever in this universe where hope is but a fleeting moment before the darkness, had prepared another father for them. On the distant world of Barbaris, shrouded in poisonous mists, where the lowlands teemed with suffering humanity and the mountain peaks belonged to necromantic overlords, a Primarch grew. His name would become synonymous with death. Mortarion, the Pale King, the Reaper of Men. He emerged from the fog like judgment itself. Tall, gaunt, with skin the color of old bone and eyes that reflected an eternal hatred of tyrants. His lungs, hardened by the poisons of Barbaris, breathed air that would slay any mortal in an instant. He gathered around him mortal warriors, those who would later be called his first Death Guard, and led them upward in assault upon the Cloud Citadels. One by one, the lords of the dead fell. One by one, those who called themselves gods perished. When the Emperor at last found his lost son upon that poisoned planet, the meeting was cold. Mortarion saw in his father yet another tyrant, one who ruled from a summit unreachable to common men. Yet the call of blood and gene code prevailed. The Emperor entrusted the Primarch with command of the 14th Legion. Mortarion descended to his new sons. He looked upon the gray armor of the Dusk Raiders and spoke words that would echo through the ages.
You are my unbroken blades. You are the Death Guard. By your hand shall justice be wrought, and doom shall descend upon 1,000 worlds.
From that day, the Dusk Raiders ceased to exist. The Legion repainted its armor. The base color remained pale as bone, while the trim became the deep green of Barbaris's venomous swamps. Recruits from the Primarch's own world joined the ranks, bringing with them their savage endurance and hatred of weakness. The Legion was divided into 7 great companies, each bearing the traditions of Barbaris. The first company, under the command of Kala's Typhon, the future Typhus, became the embodiment of inexorable might. The Death Guard marched across the galaxy with a heavy, unstoppable tread. They took upon themselves the dirtiest, most poisonous campaigns. Worlds where the atmosphere was acid, where radiation seared the flesh, where the enemy hid in bunkers beneath toxic clouds. These were the places to which they were sent. And they took those worlds, not swiftly, not beautifully, but inevitably. Their bolters knew no mercy. Their terminators in cataphractii plate stood like walls of flesh and ceramic, and the chemical weapons they deployed without hesitation turned battlefields into dead wastelands. They sought no glory. They brought death, and in that was their honor. Mortarion walked at their head, the enormous scythe Silence in his hands, a weapon that could cleave a tank with a single stroke. Beside him marched his Deathshroud, elite bodyguards clad in Terminator armor, faces hidden by hoods, wielding great crescent blades. They were silent as the grave itself. They were the Death Guard in its purest form. In those years of the Great Crusade, the Legion numbered some 95,000 Space Marines. They fought shoulder to shoulder with other legions, and none were closer than the bond between Mortarion and Horus. The War Master understood the Reaper better than any other. He saw in him a brother who shared the same bitterness and weariness of endless war. Horus knew how to speak to Mortarion of the Emperor's injustice, of how the sons were used as tools rather than equals. The seed of doubt was sown, yet for now the Death Guard remained loyal. They marched from victory to victory, leaving behind worlds cleansed of Xenos and heretics. Their reputation grew, not the swiftest, not the most brilliant, but the most reliable. Those who held the line when the galaxy burned. However, in the Primarch's heart, an old wound still festered: hatred of the Father. Hatred of any who ruled from above. And when Horus raised the banner of rebellion, Mortarion, after long and bitter internal torment, made his choice. Not from thirst for power, not from weakness, but because he saw in the War Master a chance to overthrow the Emperor's tyranny. Horus resolved to purge his legions of those still loyal to Terra. Among the Death Guard there were many, roughly a third of the warriors, especially from the 2nd, 5th, and 7th Great Companies. Captain Ully's Temeter and other loyalists fought desperately, but they were doomed. The virus bombs fell upon the planet, turning the atmosphere to poison and the soil to a grave. Those who survived the first waves faced their former brothers. The Death Guard fell upon their own. Bolter fire cut down the loyalists at close range. Terminators in heavy plate advanced through the ruins of the Coral City without pity. This was not mere betrayal. It was purification. Mortarion watched from the bridge of his ship and felt the old ideals crumbling. Yet not all fell in silence. Captain Nathaniel Garrow aboard the frigate Eisenstein managed to break free from the system with a handful of the faithful. He carried the message to Terra, the message that a beloved son of the Emperor had betrayed him. Istvan III became the first grave for many, but not the last. Then came Istvan V, the drop site massacre, the place where loyalty was crushed once and for all. The Death Guard took up positions in the Urgal Depression. Under Mortarion's command, they turned the hills into a fortress of flesh and steel. When the Loyalists advanced, the Death Guard met them with a wall of fire. Chemical shells, bolter volleys, heavy ordnance, all crashed down upon the sons of Vulcan and Ferrus Manus. The Salamanders, led by their Primarch, broke through the Death Guard lines, burning bunkers with their pyroclasts. Yet even Vulcan's inexorable fury could not shatter the Reaper's endurance. When the traitors, sons of Horus, Emperor's children, World Eaters, struck from the rear, the battle became a massacre. The Death Guard did not yield a single step. They held the center, allowing the other legions to complete the encirclement. Their losses were immense, yet they fulfilled their role. The Loyalist legions were broken. Corvus Corax barely escaped. Ferrus Manus fell. Vulcan vanished in flames. It was a triumph of betrayal. and the beginning of the end for the Death Guard in its former form. After the slaughter at Istvan V, the Death Guard knew no rest. Horus entrusted Mortarion with new tasks to hunt down those who could still threaten the War Master. The years of war stretched on like an infected wound. The Death Guard fought at Malech, at Dwell, and in dozens of other meat grinders. They were the shield and hammer of the traitors, those who held the line when others broke formation. Their casualties mounted, yet their endurance remained legendary. They did not flee. They did not complain. They simply marched forward, bringing death. And then came the hour when Horus ordered all loyal legions to march on Terra. The Death Guard, still proud of their legendary resilience, plunged into the warp to join the final assault upon the Emperor's palace. But the warp is no mere void between the stars. It is a living, ravenous sea of lies and nightmares. Mortarion's fleet was caught in a savage storm. Time stretched, reality thinned. And then the plague came. At first it was merely fever. Then the stench of rot in the air recyclers. Then the first sores beneath the ceramite. A disease that neither superhuman physiology nor ancient apothecariums could halt. The Destroyer, that was the name it would later earn. It ate away at flesh, turned blood to pus, caused armor to rust from within, and forced warriors to writhe in agony, unable to die. Even the Primarch, whose lungs had once breathed the poisons of Barbarus, felt his body betray him. Days became weeks. Weeks became eternity. Ships drifted in nothingness, filled with the groans of the dying who could not die. Mortarion, locked in his chambers, raged and despaired, crying out to powers he had once despised. He who had hated all tyrants now stood before a choice, endless torment or something else. Typhon, who had long secretly served other masters, smiled in the darkness. It was he who had guided the fleet into these deadly currents. It was he who had opened the way. And then Nurgle came. The great Lord of Decay, the father of plagues, grandfather Nurgle. He looked upon the suffering sons of Mortarion with paternal tenderness.
My children, you have struggled for so long. Rest now. Accept my gift. I will give you an end to pain and the beginning of eternal existence.
Mortarion, broken by torments even he could not endure, bowed his head. He offered his soul and the souls of his entire legion in exchange for deliverance. Nurgle accepted the offering with a joyous laugh full of rotting love. In a single moment, the plague changed. It no longer killed. It became a blessing. The bodies of the warriors swelled, covered in sores and growths, yet the pain vanished. Wounds closed with new, hideous life. Armor fused with flesh, becoming living plate that oozed pus and spores. Bolters grew rusty, yet continued to fire. And the Space Marines themselves, they became something more. They became the Death Guard in the truest sense, eternal bearers of contagion, inexorable heralds of decay. Mortarion himself was transformed. His body grew, twisted, sprouted wings of rotten flesh and horns. He became the first demon Primarch among the traitor brothers, the lord of the plague planet, the supreme champion of Nurgle. When the fleet finally tore itself free from the warp and reached Terra, the Death Guard were no longer what they had been at Istvan. They were a walking plague. Their presence poisoned the air. Their footsteps left trails of corruption. Upon the walls of the imperial palace, they sowed terror and disease. The Deathshroud, now even more horrific, marched beside their Primarch, bearing scythes from which death itself dripped. They fought on the approaches to the palace, amid the ruins, among millions of the fallen. Their endurance became absolute. Even when torn apart, they continued to crawl forward, spreading spores. Yet even their inexorable might could not turn the tide of the siege. Horus fell. The betrayal ended. The Loyalists prevailed. Broken but not destroyed, the remnants of the Death Guard withdrew into the roiling madness of the Eye of Terror. There, amidst the warp-twisted realms where reality itself suppurates and dreams bleed into nightmare, they claimed their new and everlasting home, the Plague Stars, a festering kingdom of eternal rot and boundless generosity. Mortarion, now ascended as a towering demon prince, molded a world within that blighted domain into a grotesque reflection of ancient Barbarous, poisoned skies, endless mires of filth, and towering citadels of decay where once the overlords had ruled. In this galaxy, where there is no hope, only different shades of darkness, each more suffocating than the last, the Death Guard carry the most honest and merciful truth. All that lives must rot. All that is great must fall into ruin. All that is strong must soften, blister, and decay into something far more enduring. And in that sacred decay, in the slow and beautiful surrender to entropy, lies their strange, repulsive, and eternal majesty, a grotesque nobility that the Imperium in its blind arrogance will never understand. They march. They will always march, slowly, inexorably, through the void and across a million dying worlds, bearing the plague and the profound peace of putrefaction, the quiet joy of endings that never truly end. Death is not the end. Death is only the beginning.